Hello everyone and welcome into the final show of the week here on the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Happy Friday to you all. And to conclude the week here on the show, we have a great one ahead. Starting off with a couple of NFL free agency topics and questions to address, particularly concerning the 5 teams under the most pressure headed into this free agency cycle, even with the explosion in the salary cap rather. A lot of questions to be asked for certain teams, and specifically a question that could be concerning for the 49ers. What does a Brock Purdy deal look like? And now that you know, you kind of have a basic foundation for these kind of quarterbacks resetting the market. And so those will be some questions that we address and answer today. But of course, we're going to be recapping a thrilling conclusion to the Four Nations face-off. Incredible overtime game won by, of course, perhaps the most talented player on the ice, Connor McDavid. We're looking at the Knicks-Cavs, one of 3 games in the stretch run of the season that could be pivotal in terms of playoff seedings for both respective teams. And last but not least, we're looking at the best games in college basketball this weekend. A lot of important ones that could also determine seeding come March Madness. But before we get into any of that fun stuff, I do want to remind you, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network if you haven't done so already, to keep up to date with all our new content. But if you want to contribute and interact with our shows a little bit more directly whilst we are live streaming, consider availing yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube as always. Whether it be your opinions, feedback, input you have, or even tips and donations, it is all genuinely appreciated by those concerned within the network, not just myself and my own personal show, but others as well. It just makes it that much better when you, our faithful audience, are contributing to our shows. Without further ado, let's jump right into the first topic of today, talking about one of the free agency segments we are going to have on today's show, specifically concerning the San Francisco 49ers and what kind of extension could be coming for Brock Purdy. Remember, this is someone who was the last pick in the draft about 3 to 4 years ago, only making about $1.1 million in base salary at this current moment in time, but eligible for a big contract extension. But when you look at the 49ers organizationally, there are still so many questions, so many loose ends to tie up outside of Purdy that you kind of lose your, I don't know how to put it, lose your kind of senses when it comes to this Purdy deal. Because the 49ers have so many other unrestricted free agents that contribute to the success of this team. Because, mark my words, the 49ers championship window is rapidly closing. In fact, it might have already closed. And so, while Brock Purdy, it's integral to tie him to this team for the foreseeable future if you believe he's the right guy, there are still so many other players. For example, Hufanga, Ward, Greenlaw defensively, and so many players on this offensive line who will have contract questions upcoming as well to protect Brock Purdy if he is, in fact, your franchise quarterback, that have to be answered as well. So I feel like this Purdy extension, while it's definitely going to be the pressing issue for the 49ers, there are still so many things to juggle within this organization that this kind of took a back burner. But I want to bring it to the forefront today because of this extension, you're now looking at a 49ers team that will have a lot of unrestricted free agents, a lot of players at their specific positions who are earning the highest pay in the league at their respective positions, and thus kind of creating this weird purgatory of semi-contention, perhaps, for the 49ers. So without further ado, let us jump into the hypotheticals of this deal. Because I do believe that the reason why a lot of people don't find this extension as pressing as perhaps other extensions in years past for guys like Trevor and Tua is because the 49ers can play the long game here. Because Purdy is earning a base salary next year of $1.1 million, they don't have to tie him down immediately. They can wait it out, play the long game with him, and then tie him down through a franchise tag after 2025 and kind of play it by ear. Much like what the Packers kind of did with Jordan Love, where they waited 1 year and then reworked his contract from there. So if that's the direction they want to go in, it could be a smarter move in the long run in terms of how they kind of plan financially as well. Because when I look at Purdy, is he really the guy who's going to continue to be your franchise QB? He rapidly regressed this year. He went from 4th in QBR to 10th this past year. He dropped dramatically in terms of completion percentage, in terms of touchdown passes, yards per attempt, and so on and so forth. So you got to be concerned about that. And a big part as to why Brock Purdy has been successful in the 49ers scheme has been because of the players around him. And that's going to become a point of concern if you start to not necessarily tie down other pieces around your franchise quarterback. So if I was the 49ers GM, what I would do is have him stay on this $1.1 million base salary and then wait it out for another year and then tie him down to the franchise tag. Because then, if he's not up to snuff, then we can just cut ties with him. And then we can focus on other players who either aren't up to snuff either, or just try and rebuild this team from the ground up. Because that's kind of where I see the 49ers now. They're no longer at the point where this is an integral extension for Brock Purdy. Because after last season, it's clear that the NL West is getting better, and San Fran is going to be the team in the division with a lot of questions surrounding it. It's not just Purdy and his performance. It's the players who helped him to this point, to get to this point, to have a chance to have a lofty extension. And so that's the reason why it's critical that the 49ers start to decipher how they're going to continue to build around Purdy if they're investing that much money into him, because it's now or never. And their championship window is closer to being closed than people might have expected. So let's talk about certain players who the 49ers could either cut ties with or choose to extend. Because right now, they currently have, I believe, 9 players in the top 15 of the highest pay at their respective positions. And those are guys like McCaffrey, guys like Bosa, guys like Williams. And all those guys, what they had in common was that their contract extensions were holdouts. They waited for maximum money. The 49ers are hedging their bets on Brock Purdy signing a little bit more soon in the cycle than those other guys. But it's the amount of money that's going to be very pressing and very telling of how the 49ers not only view him, but certain players they could cut ties with in terms of not necessarily staying within the realm of a friendly cap space, even with the salary cap explosion happening. So I feel Brock Purdy is right around that $55 million to $60 million threshold. He's not going to be a guy who deserves it, in my opinion, but he's right there in terms of the threshold. He has a lot of leverage in terms of this extension, but the reason why I feel the 49ers are wanting to get this deal done as soon as possible, and Brock Purdy might be on the same page, is because they might want to start considering how to build around Purdy. I feel like a lot of offensive linemen are slated to either hit free agency or be eligible for extensions along this line. You have some guys who are younger, up front there. And then in terms of his weapons, George Kittle's eligible for an extension, and I don't necessarily know how long his career is going to last in the long-term future. And then Deebo Samuel, there are already talks about him potentially being traded. So I feel like if the 49ers are correct in diagnosing Purdy as someone who is going to be willing to sign immediately and willing to tie his future to the franchise, that would allow them to do a lot of things behind the scenes outside of this issue. But in terms of money, he's not going to deserve that 53 to 55 million threshold that guys like Trevor Lawrence and Tua are earning. And there might be opportunities down the line for him to restructure said contract. But right now, it's about what these guys on the higher end of the markets are earning. And right now, Dak Prescott at $60 million is the highest in terms of average annual value. So we're probably looking at Purdy sitting somewhere behind that, maybe in the $57 to $58 million range, in my opinion. But still somewhere where you have to question if this is the right decision for the 49ers. Because I would, if I were them, wait this out. Because I don't necessarily know the future of not just Purdy, but several players on this roster. So why not play the long game if you're the 49ers? Keep him on that base salary and then decide whether or not to extend or franchise tag him at the end of the year. But other than that, you'd be looking at a massive contract for someone who, yes, has appeared in a Super Bowl for you, but might not be the guy who is going to continue to lead this team to further glory. So that's the question for the 49ers. Are they willing to invest that much money in Brock Purdy for several years of mediocrity if they can't tie everyone around him to big deals? And that's going to be an integral part of that. Or are they willing to play the long game and try and find a way financially to cut a couple of corners for Brock Purdy's sake? That's a big if, but I think that this has to be on the table for the 49ers to consider. But let me know what you think about this contract situation in the comments below, because coming next, we transition over to the world of hockey. The thrilling conclusion to the Four Nations face-off last night that saw Connor McDavid score an overtime winner for Canada. We'll be right back after this short break to discuss whatever happened there.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. Some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. Before we get into our very thrilling second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you, as always, to avail yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net, to better contribute and interact with our live shows a little bit more directly, whether it be through your opinions, any feedback, any input you have for our shows, or even tips and donations, everything involved with this process is greatly appreciated, and this makes our shows that much better when you, our faithful audience, are contributing to them. Without further ado, let's recap the thrilling conclusion of the Four Nations face-off between the U.S. and Canada, shall we? What a game of hockey. A game billed as even bigger than the Stanley Cup certainly lived up to the hype at TD Garden last night. Incredible play from both sides. Incredible savvy play, incredible defensive play, incredible goaltending from both Hellebuyck and Binnington, which we'll talk about a lot throughout the course of this segment. But it all came down to one man, left wide open in the slot. The most talented player in all of hockey, Connor McDavid, scoring the OT winner and giving Canada the Four Nations final and ultimately launching them into a future where they can still have supremacy over the U.S. until the 2026 Winter Olympics in Italy, but the U.S. should not hang their heads low. In fact, they played a fantastic game that ultimately was just decided by a very talented player and just the savviness and finesse of this Canada team. But what I really liked about this game is it reminded us of the beauty of hockey. Because the first game was a very physical affair. 3 fights within the first 9 seconds, 64 hits over the course of 3 periods. And this game, it was all about finesse, feeling each other out, battling to the very end. And ultimately, it had to come down to big-time players making big-time plays. And ultimately, leaving McDavid wide open in the slot was a terrible decision by Team USA in that moment. But as an Edmonton Oilers fan, I was like, if it's anyone beating the U.S., it has to be Connor McDavid, right? He's meant for these big moments. But it was more than just Connor McDavid. It was about both of these teams battling it out for their countries, the pride of their flags, and ultimately delivering the hype for this magnitude of game. So, without further ado, let's just jump into it more, talk about the players that made a big difference, and talk most importantly about the depth of both squads and what this potentially mean for those Olympics in Italy in 1 year time. Obviously, we can talk about, McDavid, herald him as one of the game's greatest stars right now, if not the greatest star at this current moment in time. It was more than just him. Let's talk about these two goaltenders, right? Everyone knew that Connor Hellebuyck was playing the best at the goalie position headed into this tournament for Winnipeg. Heavy favorite right now for the Vezina Trophy and potentially the Hart Trophy favorite as well. Be the first goaltender since Carey Price for Montreal won it in 2015 if that happened. And he was magnificent in this game. Canada had to beat him with finesse and savvy and their incredible skill from their frontline skaters, but Hellebuyck ultimately withstood the challenge and he was fantastic in net. But it was all about the rejuvenation of Jordan Binnington, turning back the clock to 2019 when he was just a young rookie playing for the St. Louis Blues in the very same arena where he won that game last night. Incredible performance, especially in overtime. An incredible save to deny Matthew Tkachuk that almost led to that goal immediately after. And Binnington truly put on a clinic in keeping his team in this game. If it weren't for him, I feel like the USA, in terms of their forwards, creating havoc in that zone, really could have led to them winning this game. They created enough high-danger chances, and ultimately, Gensel, Tkachuk, Matthews were frustrating that Canadian defense all night. But Binnington stood tall, took this game into overtime, ultimately was, quote-unquote, the better goaltender in overtime, even though both of them played miraculously within the first 8 minutes of that overtime before the goal. So, just goes to show that an unsung hero can emerge when you play in these kind of tournaments, and it just happened to be Binnington. But then, let's look at the most important factor of this game. Depth. Depth for both teams. Not just Canada, but the U.S. Remember, the U.S. without two of their best blue liners in Quinn Hughes, who was a last-minute scratch, I believe, because of an upper body injury, and then Charlie McAvoy with a similar situation. In the first game, McAvoy was immense for this U.S. squad. Absolutely immense. Physical in the forecheck, physical in terms of acquiring hits. Just an incredible player in that game. But then look at the depth that the U.S. were able to call upon in his absence. Jake Sanderson stepping up and scoring a very important goal that gave the U.S. the lead early in the second. And then a guy like Jacob Slavin putting his body on the line for his country. An absolutely underappreciated defenseman, not just on the international circuit, but in terms of the NHL as well. Really incredible player. And then for the Canadians, it was more about a guy coming back and adding depth to their blue line than a guy being absent. The ability to call on a guy like Cale Makar is incredible to behold because he potentially is one of the best young defensemen in the entire world right now. And then a guy like Sam Bennett stepping up, a guy like Thomas Harley stepping up in Josh Morrissey's stead. All of these guys in critical moments, Sam Bennett getting the game-tying goal that ultimately sent it to overtime. So, a lot of questions answered about both of these teams' depth, and really, it just came down to who won certain moments, in my opinion. And one thing that I can't help but notice about games of this magnitude is that it calls upon a lot more than just tactics. It calls upon the ability to focus and understand that this isn't all about you as an individual hockey player. It's about a team effort. And both of these teams, because they have so much experience in these situations, that they had the depth necessary to fight for almost over an hour and a half of play in a very high-stakes environment at TD Garden is incredible to behold. And not even the best players, potentially, for these certain countries that came up in big moments. No one expected Jake Sanderson potentially to score such a pivotal goal in a winner-take-all game. No one expected someone like Brady Tkachuk to be one of the most passionate leaders of the U.S. in this tournament. And yet there they were. No one expected Jordan Binnington to stand his head. In fact, many people were probably clamoring for more minutes for other goalkeepers for the Canadians, like Aiden Hill and Sam Montalbo, maybe even a guy like Logan Thompson, although I don't necessarily think he was fully healthy for this tournament. But I do think that the unsung heroes really made a difference for these squads. Now let's talk about how all this transitions to 2026 in the Winter Olympics, and specifically about two specific players that are going to be called into questions for their respective squads. The first one being Sidney Crosby. And it's remarkable how at the age of 38 he has so much left to give for this Canada squad. In fact, he was their leading point scorer. He was their leading point scorer with 1 goal and 4 assists in the entire competition, playing through a hand injury that clearly affected him, and ultimately still delivering for this squad. But the question is, how much more does he have to give? Because there are a lot of talented Canadian forwards on the come up, and I'm not certain that Sidney Crosby is going to be seen as a high-end player in the next year. He's going to be a year older. Potentially he could come back as more of a vocal presence for this squad, but I don't see him leading this team on the ice. And then on the other side of the coin, you have a guy in Austin Matthews whose narrative is just getting ever more disappointing in terms of how he profiles as one of the great players of his generation. He's now 0-7 in winner-take-all games. And that paints a bleak picture of how people are going to view him. He's still one of the most generational talents we have right now in the hockey world, but if he isn't delivering on the game's biggest stages, what are we going to think of him in the future? There's a reason he was named captain of the squad, but until he proves that he can play a pivotal role in these meaningful games, I don't know how people will view his career in the very near future. But in terms of more pressing issues as a collective for both of these squads, let's talk about Canada's goalie conundrum here. Because the fact that they were willing to put in guys like Hill and Montalbo in specific moments is pretty critical of the assessment of Canada's goalie situation. Will they really rely on someone like Jordan Binnington in a much more high-stakes environment, in my opinion, than a Four Nations face-off when you're going against the best teams in the world in the Winter Olympics? Because you have depth there, but it's just that you don't know how good your depth can be in big moments. Because yes, Logan Thompson, in my opinion, has more value than Jordan Binnington in tournament-style moments. But then you have guys like Skinner and Kemper who are a little bit more unsettled in those situations, but still could offer you a lot. So I feel like that's the only major problem going forward for Canada, because they have a lot of depth to call upon. And then for the U.S., questions about how they compete if, the blue line's a major issue going forward. Because obviously this could have been a very different game if Quinn Hughes and Charlie McAvoy were playing. But you can't ultimately look back at this and say, oh, woe is me, because we didn't have two of our best blue liners, we lost this game. No, you're going to have to take it on the chin and assess how you can improve that aspect of your game. But most importantly, what I love about this game is that it didn't set either team back ahead of the Winter Olympics. In fact, it gave them a little bit more to springboard further their chances of competing in the Winter Olympics against teams that will be there like Sweden and Finland as well. So that's why I think that this game is certainly something that both teams can take a lot away from. But let me know what you think about that conclusion last night. Because coming up next, we transition back actually to the world of basketball, where we preview a very high-stakes game in the Eastern Conference between the Knicks and Cavs. One of three meetings these teams will have down the stretch. Be right back after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely...
Hello everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of today's show, we'll be talking about a pivotal matchup in the Eastern Conference between the Knicks and the Cavs. One of three games these teams will play down the stretch could be very pivotal in terms of their playoff seeding. But ultimately as well, a difference in philosophies from both of these teams. When we look at how the Knicks play compared to how the Cavs play, I feel like those philosophies will come to light not just in the 3 games they have remaining in the regular season, but if these two should match up against each other come the postseason, because that's where it gets more critical. And the critical stat right now for the New York Knicks is that they're 0-5 against the NBA's top 3 teams, including, I believe, already 2 losses to the same Cavs team. And the difference between last year and this year is that the Cavs actually have improved both offensively and defensively, as well as in being able to acquire the depth necessary to handle the Knicks starting 5, to the point where now the Knicks philosophies, I feel, are going to get called more into question, not just in the postseason, but in the regular season as well, if they fail to win or lose, in fact, all 3 of these games. And so that's why this game, to me, is a defining one at the very least in the Eastern Conference. There may be bigger ones down the stretch to determine playoff seeding, whether they be between teams in the play-in or even the Cavs and Celtics if it gets close in the race for the 1 seed. But this one, in my opinion, is one that the Cavs have been preparing for after last year's exit to the Knicks. And so that's why this game, to me, needs to be highlighted. Let's talk about the paths of both of these teams at this current moment in time. The Cavs are on a 5-game win streak. They have 4 of those wins coming by double digits. And the most surprising thing about how the Cavs are doing that is they have a clear delineation of the players within the rotation that they can rely upon. And when all this depth is available to them, that's when they're at their most strong. The Knicks, on the other hand, are coming off 2 overtime wins. Their starters logged over 38 minutes. Every single one of their starters logged over 38 minutes. The only time the Cavs this season had 1 or more starters log over 38 minutes was way back in November against the Celtics when Mitchell and Mobley played 40 and 38 minutes respectively. That should tell you the game plan the Cavs have, because on certain nights they can rely on their stars in more ways than one, and maybe it could become a necessity for them going forward if certain role players struggle. But it's how they've adapted to what they saw in their struggles against the Knicks in that playoff series last year that has led them to this point. And so the Knicks, by remaining stubborn in their philosophies, potentially could be hurting in the regular season. And maybe that's the reason why the stat I point to this season for the Knicks is that 0-5 mark against top 3 teams. And heading into the postseason, it may not become as much of a concern for them because we saw that Thibodeau's philosophies in those settings could work out in the long run for them. But if you are struggling to keep up with the times in the NBA, where depth is critical to your success, then it could translate into regular season losses. And regular season losses actually, in my opinion, matter more than postseason losses. Because in the postseason, there could be glaring differences between your team and another. But in the regular season, you're battling so that the postseason could mean more to you. If the Knicks lose all 3 of these games, or only win 1, then they are really in the thick of potentially getting bounced early in the postseason. And it just goes to show how the NBA year after year places stock in how you build on certain moments. And the Cavs have clearly taken their loss to the Knicks in the postseason to heart. Think about this. In those 2 overtime wins for the Knicks, every starter, like I said, logged over 38 minutes. And the fact that the Cavs only have a handful of players that could potentially play 38 minutes per night is incredible to behold, because it just goes to show they throw so many looks at you that you have to prepare for all of them. And the Knicks are sticking to their guns the whole way through, not just in the regular season, in the postseason. That's really got to concern a lot of Knicks fans. But here's the thing about Cleveland that I really think is important to note. When players such as, say, Dean Wade or Ty Jerome are said to be coming back from injury and being important pieces to this roster, that is the mentality of a championship squad. Because you don't expect a guy like Dean Wade or Isaac Okoro or Ty Jerome or Sam Merrill that need to contribute to a championship caliber squad. But the fact that their returns offer opportunities for this Cleveland Cavaliers team to rotate so much just poses a threat to the rest of the NBA that needs to be addressed by opposing teams. And of all the opposing teams, it's the Knicks that really are the ones who precipitated this. And in a funny way, it's also the Knicks that I feel like are the least equipped to handle it. Because if all these depth pieces for the Cavaliers continue to throw different looks at you, continue to force you to play out of rhythm, then the Knicks are certainly a team, and because of Thibodeau's philosophies, can be most pressed and challenged by the Cavs. So that's why no other games for the Cavs or Knicks matter more than the 3 games coming out, especially tonight's. Because the Knicks, yes, no matter how many overtime games they play in, still believe in the formula. And they're going to continue to until they feel like they can't anymore, which might not be for the long-term future or for however long Tom Thibodeau remains their head coach. So we know what we're going to get from the New York Knicks. But there has to come a time that it becomes too much for the Knicks organization to bear, watching their team struggle against deeper, more talented teams. Because for the Cavs, this season to them certainly means more than a lot for other teams. The fact that they were able to acquire one of the more underappreciated two-way talents in the NBA with DeAndre Hunter just goes to show that they're really investing in having so many different options. And here's an impressive stat to know for the Cavs. DeAndre Hunter has only played in 3 games of the last 10 for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They still rank first in offensive rating and second over that 10-game span. They still have an incredible defensive rating, currently 8th in the NBA. So it's no sweat off their back if, say, a depth piece is injured. If, say, it's taking a little while for DeAndre Hunter to get worked into this lineup. Because they have the time. They know how their rotations work. They feel like any rotation can work for them. And most importantly, they're proving against the teams they need to beat in order to maintain this contender status and really prove that some teams are going to definitely be more challenged when they face this Cleveland Cavaliers team come postseason time. And by proving it in the regular season, it just leaves more seeds of doubt within teams like the Knicks' minds. Because outside of those top 3 teams, the Cavs, the Celtics, and Knicks, which teams are going to offer that much of a threat? Can Milwaukee now with Kyle Kuzma offer that much of a threat to this top 3? Can the Indiana Pacers find their pace, for lack of a better term, in their offense and get back up to speed? Can the Orlando Magic defense really be that threatening in a postseason setting? I don't think so. So it's going to come down to those 3 teams in the East. And when I think about the outlook of the Knicks, I'm truly concerned when they go into the postseason of how, if they don't emerge victorious in at least one of these games, they're going to feel it going up against this Cavs squad. Because in the postseason, depth matters more than anything. And it's going to matter more so in this postseason than previous postseasons, perhaps. So if the Knicks aren't prepared for that, then these 3 games might not even matter, because they might have already lost in the postseason if they don't change their mindset a little bit in terms of how to prepare for potentially meeting the Cavs in that setting. Let me know what you think about this game, their upcoming games, and how they might match up in the postseason should this potentially be a matchup there as well. Because coming next, we're going to talk about the 5 teams under the most pressure, even despite the salary cap increase for this free agency cycle in the NFL. I'll be right back to talk about it after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts.
Hello everybody and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, and for our 4th segment of today's show, we're going to be talking still about NFL free agency, but more so about certain teams that are under pressure this offseason, whether it be because of salary cap concerns, whether it be because of contract extensions and things of that magnitude, that even despite the salary cap increase could still be potential roadblocks for all of them. So without further ado, let's jump right into this segment and talk about some teams that are potentially up against it this offseason. Starting off with a team with a lot of contract extensions to figure out, the Cincinnati Bengals. Let me pull up my graphic here. The Cincinnati Bengals are a squad that should certainly have their championship window remain open, but considering the fact that they have so many contract issues to figure out, this defense is nowhere near championship caliber. And you have Trey Hendrickson entering the final year of his contract. This is a team that has to be very wise about how they view the players necessary to maintain this window. You have no margin for error in the Jamar Chase talks. You have a little bit more for T. Higgins because I think that even if you trade him, you can find more options in the draft. But because of the defensive issues that are rather glaring, the draft could be another pivotal moment for this Cincy team. Because if T. Higgins is gone, they might have to address your wide receiver too and really call into question the depth of this wide receiver core. But then you also have to start thinking about your defense as well, because Trey Hendrickson might not be here for that much longer, and this defense cannot be sustainable without him at the very least. So you have to consider offense and finding a complement to Jamar Chase, or defense and hope that defensive draft pick can bolster the chances of Trey Hendrickson remaining. And so, even though Cincy may not have more cap constraints than other teams, it's certainly a team to watch in how they deal with all the contract extensions and who they deal with first. Because I think it would be proactive to get Higgins out of the way, determine whether or not he's going to be a part of this team, and try and find potentially a nice trade package for him. If not, then deal with Jamar, then deal with Hendrickson. Because I do think you don't want to lose any offensive talent if it comes to that either, and see this offense regress a little bit. But you still also have to keep that defense in the back of your mind. And I still think that in terms of this draft, defense could be checked to be the move for Cincy at the point where they're picking. So look out for Cincy in this free agency cycle. And also look out for Cincy next free agency cycle if the same things happen again this season where the defense underperforms. Because Zach Taylor could very well be a goner after next year if nothing improves. But then, obviously, a team that a lot of people are going to be monitoring, not just for this free agency cycle, to be honest with you, but many years afterwards, because of the repercussions of the Deshaun Watson contract. It's the Cleveland Browns. It's not even the Deshaun Watson contract anymore. It's the main picture on my screen. What to do with Myles Garrett. Can you find a good trade deal for him, which I think a lot of teams will be willing to do? Or you decide to keep him by trying to ensure this team's contention window remains open. But I don't know how convincing that pitch is going to be when you're still, no matter what happens, going to be eating a lot of dead money once you either release Deshaun Watson or his contract expires. Because now you are tied to a situation where it might be untenable to draft a quarterback, and the free agency quarterback class is very weak. So if you're the Browns, I don't know what direction you're going to take at the very least the quarterback position. Because at least if you trade away Myles Garrett, you gain back draft capital. But if you don't know your quarterback situation and are not confident in, say, either drafting one of Ward or Sanders or trying to find a competent enough bridge option in the free agency class, then that's really glaring. And you're not going to be a team with that much salary cap space, even with this increase in the next coming years because of the weight of that Deshaun contract. So I think that the best way moving forward for the Rams to try and compensate the potential losses that will come with the offloading of the Deshaun contract potentially in the coming years is to acquire as much draft capital as you can in potential Myles Garrett trade and hope for the best. And try and, in this draft, just pick the best players available, because chances are you're going to have a very weak roster with or without Myles Garrett either way. So I don't necessarily think it's about finding your quarterback of the future in this year's draft. And the 2026 QB class will be looking much stronger. So I say tank this season, acquire as much draft capital as possible in terms of what to do with Myles Garrett, and then go into next offseason with a clear vision potentially of what you can do at the quarterback position. Because I feel like that's when more leeway can be availed to you if you're Cleveland. So Cleveland is definitely going to be a team high on everyone's list to watch over the next couple of free agency cycles. I don't necessarily think Kevin Stefanski is going to be on the out, but I think that, if his views on Deshaun Watson remain kind of steady and he's not pointing the arrow in one or the other direction in terms of what he thinks of the Deshaun Watson situation, that could be a red flag for his career in Cleveland. But let's move on to the team that is not necessarily going to be climbing much of a mountain over the next couple of years in terms of getting out of the dead cap space they already have. The New Orleans Saints, man. I cannot tell you how this Saints team is going to even contend within the next 5 to 10 years, to be honest with you. Even if you restructure Derek Carr's contract, even if you cut a couple of your young stars, even if you trade away people, you still are facing so much cap constraints. And if I'm Kellen Moore, I don't know how I'm getting this team out of this cycle of mediocrity. Because chances are you're going to remain mediocre enough to where your draft picks aren't going to matter. And I don't necessarily think many people want Saints players on the trade market either. So the Saints are clearly stuck in this purgatory, not just for this free agency cycle, but for a long time. Because restructuring Derek Carr's contract doesn't free up much money for you. It would still be just over $3 million over the cap if you restructure Carr's contract. You can't necessarily cut players because they would still be earning roster bonuses either way. So if I'm New Orleans, I'm up against it. I would just say, if I'm Kellen Moore, maybe in 1 or 2 years, you try and cut ties with Carr and see what you have in your young players, because that's the only way forward. Younger players, at the very least, don't come with too much baggage financially, so that might have to be the pathway forward for this New Orleans Saints team, because a lot of these players are tied to your cap situation, and without any sign of cap relief, you're going to have to rely more often than not on the youth improving. And if they do, maybe there's a way to, by drafting more players, get out of the cap situation and push it a little further along in the road because of all the players maybe drafting on rookie contracts. But it still is a very, very, very difficult situation for the New Orleans Saints to pull out of. So they might be on this list for many years to come if they don't start figuring out certain ways to cost cut right now. And then the last team, certainly a team that's already making a lot of headlines, but not necessarily a team I'm too worried about because of the new coaching and general manager regime. Actually, not just yet. The New England Patriots. Now, this team is a little bit different from the next team I'm going to be talking about, just because they have the infrastructure of a quarterback like Drake May already there. But I think that they have to get a lot of things right in terms of the draft, in terms of Mike Vrabel's philosophy, in terms of protecting Drake May, just because you have to start trying to make a plan for contention again, and Drake May is the blueprint. And so you don't want to lose the blueprint with a long-term injury because your offensive line sucks. So if I'm Mike Vrabel, I'm already planning for the draft, already planning for future drafts potentially as well, and already trying to make a space, create a space rather, for Drake May to thrive in New England. But this team, to me, just needs to focus on getting the drafts right in the near future for Drake May's success, because he's still young, still in rookie contract, so you can do a lot with what you need. They have a lot of cap space as well, potentially can improve the defense there too, but they need to start building through the draft as well, because for as long as May's on his rookie contract, that's a net positive. And last but not least, obviously the Jets were the team I was trying to get to when I was talking about the new coaching regime, because Aaron Glenn and Darren Maugi already want to start off on a fresh foot by parting ways with Aaron Rodgers. But that's not the least of their problems either. You have to think about the futures of Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed. A lot of foundational pieces that you need to tie down in order for this Jets team to have any hopes of contention. And then obviously the quarterback situation needs to be figured out. But I don't know if there's going to be any one specific player they may be looking for in this draft. They might be out of reach for a top quarterback, and I don't see them overreaching for anyone in this class. So it's just about starting fresh, potentially looking at the free agency market for their new QB, at least for a bridge option for next year. But I still think that this Jets team would be nice to see how Aaron Glenn and Darren Maugi handle the rest of this offseason. That'll just about do it for this segment. Coming up to conclude today's show in the week here, I'll be looking ahead to the college basketball weekend, highlighting some of the big games between the top premier teams in college basketball. I'll be right back after this short break. Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our final segment of today, and for that matter, the week, we're looking at some of the premier games in college basketball this weekend. A lot of excitement within the top 25, and a lot of excitement within the conferences as well. I know that we already might have a solid idea of which conference reigns supreme, hint the SEC, but there are still underappreciated teams in certain conferences that I want to highlight. So without further ado, let's jump right into them, starting off with an underappreciated conference with two very underappreciated teams, in my opinion. Iowa State and Houston is the only matchup that we're going to be talking about in this segment that hasn't had a head-to-head meeting this season. In fact, the last time these two teams met was in the Big 12 title game last year when Iowa State, with their suffocating defense, beat Houston 69-41. And this year, that kind of matchup could spell the same. Both of these teams, elite defenses. Houston, top defense, in fact, in the Big 12, and then the top 5 in the country. Iowa State, third in the conference, and then the top 10 nationally as well. But I think that both of these teams, in my humble opinion, are somewhat headed in different directions. Houston quietly going with their business. Impressive road win against Arizona last weekend gave them a 2-game cushion in the Big 12 standings over teams like Kansas State and Texas Tech. And Iowa State kind of has righted the ship a little bit, but did lose 3 straight games earlier in the month of January. And they kind of lost their place as a 1 seed, but they're riding the ship enough to be a competent 2 seed. And both of these teams are heading into the tournament with style. But in terms of this game, I expect it to be a very low-scoring affair because of the defense, because I think that there are a couple key pieces for both teams who may be entering this game a little bit banged up. I think for Iowa State specifically, you gotta hope that Milan Momcilovic has finally found his footing a little bit more, found his shooting stroke, because this could be a game determined by how both teams shoot on the perimeter. And then for Houston, it's going to be all about how Milos Ujan looks, because a lot of questions were going to be asked of him, replacing an All-American talent, one of the best Houston point guards in their history, in Jamal Shed. And he is playing his best basketball right now, though, right this minute, with 13.9 points and 4.6 assists averaged over his previous 8 games. So I do think that although this is a battle of top defenses, certain players have the chance to step up. And in ways to exploit, Houston needs to have a suffocating defensive game plan to take advantage of moments where Iowa State could be careless with the basketball. They've turned over on at least 22% of their possessions in 4 of their last 6 games entering Monday, and in fact that sees them drop to 11th in the Big 12 in terms of turnover percentage. For Houston, though, I think the game can be won and lost behind the 3-point line, because that's where Iowa State has really struggled defensively, by covering the 3. So if I'm Houston, I'm taking advantage of any slip-ups this team has, in Iowa State, for that matter, in terms of turning the ball over and then trying to shoot the 3 as effectively as possible. And if I'm Iowa State, I gotta rely on Milan Momcilovic being the difference here, being healthy enough to find his shooting stroke, because this is going to be a low-scoring affair that I predict will see Houston come out 62-58 winners, in my opinion. Now let's transition over to the SEC, the Conference of Heavyweights. Let's talk first about the Tennessee-Texas A&M game. Let's transition to the Alabama-Kentucky game, because the Tennessee-Texas A&M game is a very intriguing matchup. Texas A&M coming off a very, very disheartening loss, only scoring 54 points against Mississippi State. And just go to show the Jekyll and Hyde nature of this Texas A&M offense. When they're on, they're on. Wade Taylor IV and Manuel Baskin, one of my favorite inside-outside duos in the nation, in fact, when they're on. But when they're off, they really are off. They had 14 second-half turnovers and really did not get into any rhythm during that game. It had to be disappointing. Tennessee, on the other hand, trying to round into form at the perfect time. And I love how Zakai Zeigler's playing. I love how he's leading this team both offensively and defensively and allowing certain players the opportunity to step up within this roster. It's going to be an exciting game. I think it's also going to be a very low scoring one just because we don't know how the volatility of Texas A&M's offense is going to play into this game. But I think that Tennessee might take this one by having a nice sustained period of offense in the second half and run away with it a little bit to the tune of an 82-67 final in their favor. And then this Alabama-Kentucky game is very intriguing. They have 8 consecutive games against top 25 opponents. They failed the first 2 tests by allowing a season-high 110 points to Missouri and allowing a broomless Auburn, at least in the latter stages of that game, to overwhelm them offensively. And it now sweat off their back because they still believe they are one of the best offenses in the entire nation. But it's going to call into question their defensive abilities, especially not just if they make it deeper in this tournament, but especially in early rounds when certain teams who are smaller than them and are these mid-major teams who play and thrive with tempo and transition might start to speed up their game as well. But Alabama lives and dies by the 3, lives and dies by pace as well. Whereas Kentucky, coming into this one a bit shorthanded, especially in that front court with Jackson Robinson and Lamont Butler dealing with a couple of injuries. It's lost 3 of its past 6 games, but still has that top 25 pedigree in terms of beating several teams within those ranks. And I think that, they don't need to be completely perfect, Kentucky, but they are going to need to rely on that backcourt a little bit. That backcourt a little bit more. Otega Owe is a very talented player who has scored in double digits in all of Kentucky's games this season. Is going to have to play a big role in this one. And then for Alabama, ever since the insertion of Chris Youngblood, this roster has been shooting 38% from beyond the arc. They really start to see their 3-point shooting number skyrocket. And I really like how, even though they're losing, they still are able to put up as many points as they possibly can. They just need to shore up this defense, which is one of the worst in the SEC. In fact, 10th in the league. So it's going to come down to personnel changes and adjustments for both of these squads. And really, I think it's going to come down to which teams have the tempo most importantly, because Alabama is going to want to play fast and loose. And really, the Wildcats are going to want to live in the middle of the paint and try and make their 2-point shots at the rim or in that territory. So I feel that might cater to Alabama a bit more than Kentucky because they're willing to play whatever pace you set for them. But I do think that Kentucky is more than the sum of its parts, and it's going to be a close one decided by only a couple of points. So give me Alabama, but by a score of, say, 87-82, where Kentucky really can make this close in the stretch. But I have to factor in the fact that this front court for Kentucky might not be as healthy as we once thought. So that's why Alabama, in my opinion, because of the many styles they can employ, are going to come out the winners here. But I still think Kentucky can be competitive. And last but not least, let's go to a game in the Big East, shall we? We don't often talk about the Big East because it's kind of lost its luster a little bit. But both of these teams certainly project to be interesting ones heading into March Madness. UConn and St. John's. St. John's now the cream of the crop in this conference, led by Rick Pitino, really balanced team, suffocating style of defense, and no matter who needs to step up for them, in that game against DePaul, for example, Lewis Jr. is out, Io steps in, and I know it's DePaul and they're the worst team in the Big East, but when you have players who can step in like Io did in that game, anything is possible for you. And I know that UConn, a lot of people are saying, oh, this team is not the same offensively. This team is too reliant on this freshman phenom. This freshman phenom is healthy and playing his best basketball in months. this particular period on the stretch. Very impressive performances in the past couple of games for Liam McNeely. 38 points and 5 threes against Creighton, and perhaps the best of the bunch. But it's going to come down to how one of the better offenses in college basketball, especially in the Big East, goes up against the St. John's side, who has been vulnerable of late, allowing Villanova and Creighton to score more than 1 point per possession in their past couple of games. But it's really going to come down to how focused a lot of these experienced players for UConn can be. Caravan starting to come into his own after a bit of a slump. Solo Ball has been incredible in replacement for Liam McNeely. And then in terms of how St. John's is going to come out, we know that St. John's wins defensively, right? They suffocate you defensively. But can they dictate the offensive glass? They don't necessarily have as much of a second chance profile as a lot of teams in the Big East. And UConn, though, has struggled. So if they can dictate the tempo on offense, really getting more opportunities to score in succession through second chance opportunities, this game could pretend to be a blowout. But if UConn can find their footing, especially offensively, Liam McNeely has another all-star game, then who knows. But I'm going to take St. John's in this one, and I think it's going to be a score line of 86-73. But let me know what you think in the comments below. If you're a big college basketball fan, that will just about do it for the show and the week here on the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in throughout the week. We'll be back next week, same time as always, 2:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday. But other than that, I'm out for today, and I will see y'all Monday.